time to turn this over to Mel Levitin and Christine Pisani.
Thanks, Sidna. So I'm Mel Levitin. I'm the Executive Director of the Idaho State Independent Living Council, and I'm here with Christine Pisani, who's the Executive Director of the Idaho Council on Developmental Disabilities. And Christine and I have worked together for probably about 18 years, since she was a program specialist here at the DD Council, and since I was an advocate at Disability Rights Idaho, our state protection and advocacy system. We initially worked on voter education projects together. You'll have to forgive us. We try not to look at each other very much because we have a tendency to laugh too much. So as we were just preparing for this, I just want to make a note. I tend to be the blunt one. Those of you who know me know that's true. And Christine tends to be the one who's much better with big words than I am. For any of you who are concerned, we are in each other's bubble pretty frequently. So that's why we're not wearing masks, and we're clearly closer than 6 feet or 10 feet or 20 feet or whatever your particular bubble is. So today we'll be talking about cultural competence, and I'd like to get an idea of where you are in the process, offer our experience in how we approach cultural competence in our own lives and organizations, and allow for questions during the last 10 minutes or so of our presentation. If you find that you just have a lot of questions about something that we're talking about, be sure and throw that in the chat or in the Q&A. Sidna's going to be watching that. So if something comes up, don't feel like you have to wait till the end. We want to make sure we're not leaving anybody behind. So we'd like to begin by taking a pulse of where you are in your organization. Our first polling question is, how many of you are doing cultural competency work in your center or silk? And it looks like the choices are, yes, you are, no, you're not, I don't know. Oh, hosts and panelists cannot vote.
Mel, this is Sidna, just real quick.
Yes.
One question has popped up. It says,
Yep.
what pronouns do you to address you by?
I am she, her.
I am also she, her.
Thank you. And that answers that question for us. Thank you.
And there's still some votes coming in. Okay, do you want me to go ahead and end it?
Yeah, that'd be great. I don't know. I like that. So we've got 38% as yes, they're doing cultural competency in your organization. Looks like 20% no, they're not, and 42% I don't know. I'm really with you on that 42%. I frequently don't know what I'm working on in our organization. It depends on the second and who walks in the door. So thanks for taking the time to do that. The cultural competency work that Christine and I both do in our organizations is informed some through our life experience, some through professional experience, through training that we've both sought actually through Georgetown, and we've had some great opportunities. So really a part of my experience is lived experience in informal foster homes on the Coeur d'Alene Reservation in northern Idaho, and then also in primarily hanging out amongst Indigenous people in urban communities while homeless as a young person in Seattle in that area. Professionally, I've worked at a tribal crisis shelter for young people and kids, the Fallon Paiute Shoshone tribes in Nevada, and also with Tribal Youth at Risk in Northern Idaho. So that's a bit of my background. Also, my wife is Mexican American, and all of our grandkids are some shade of not white. And although I've lived among people who are not part of the dominant culture, to be clear, I am a product of the dominant white culture. I often forget, even in my own family, and I've been married to Elva for 18 years and we've been together nearly 20, I forget things that are at the front of her brain, as far as worrying about her sons, and concern for our grandkids. It's easy for me, even though I have that steady background and living in within different cultures, I still forget that other people in our community aren't as safe as I am. I have some experience of being marginalized because I identify as lesbian. I live in a pretty rural, very white, very conservative state. So I have my own experience in that, but I certainly don't claim to understand everyone's experience. Some of the work that we do actually came about. I have a son-in-law who's a refugee from Rwanda. He came to this country about 20 years ago, and he and I have talked quite a bit about just different cultural expectations and different terms and views of independence. My wife's family is very interdependent, and I frequently catch and I'm pretty good at it now. I catch myself before I say stupid things like, why doesn't your mom just move out and get her own place? Because that's, what she should do, so that you guys, he and my daughter, have their own space. And he just looks at me really confused, like, why on earth would I do that to my mother? And, and I catch myself. And so I think about these things. And we have a fairly, for the size of Boise's what, 300,000-ish people? We have a fairly large refugee community. We're located in a resettlement area, and I have had the opportunity to go to different events that I've seen that the community hosts. And one of the things that one of the groups does here, it's a social services agency for refugees. They host a community dinner. They did BC before COVID, and they have a community dinner once a month, and it's open to anyone who can come. It's catered, and then they ask that people, if they want to bring something to eat or bring something to share, that you do that. So Elva, my wife, and I have gone a couple of times. And it's just a great, it's like, I'm not going there to sell anything. I'm not going there to talk about independent living. I'm just going to meet people and to share and to learn and to listen. And it's really, it's different than other things that I've gone to in white culture. It's very similar to things I've done, potlucks and such, with indigenous people around the Pacific Northwest. It's similar to that in that everybody brings food. Lots of people everyone is expected to take food home. They have a closet where they share. If you have, people need to pick up clothing, they have the clothing in the closet. No questions are asked. And it's just an opportunity to sit and eat with people and watch kids run around and be kids, and it's a great experience to go. I'm gonna be honest, I was uncomfortable the first time we went. I tend to be uncomfortable whenever I go into situations where I don't really know anybody. So that piece was hard for me. But that's true when I go into any setting. I was much more comfortable going to those community dinners than I ever am when I go up to our legislature. And I do that pretty frequently. So it was a very comfortable, welcoming group. So that's one of the things that has been really important for me to do, both personally and professionally. So I work with the executive director of the International Rescue Committee here. We actually moved our offices up closer to those centers when we were able to, and that was part of why we were drawn to the location that we went to, because there are several different refugee service organizations up there, and we wanted to be closer to that so that when there's something that it comes time for them to know what we have, we're around, but that it's done in a way that's respectful of what they need as individuals in their culture. So, you know, we frequently in independent living and really anything that's a social service, we throw around, you know, that we're going to meet people where they are, right? So if we're going to work with people with mental illness, we're going to meet them where they are. If we're going to work with people who are unhoused, we're going to meet them where they are. If we're going to work with people from Hispanic cultures, we're going to meet them where they are. We're going to go to their church bazaars. We're gonna meet them. But then what we're gonna do is when we get there, we're gonna have a table and we're gonna sell our wares, right? So we're gonna talk about independent living and how great independent living is, and don't you want to live independently too and move away from your family and then get services and supports from an insurance provider. And they just look at us like, why in God's name would I want to move away from my family? What, you know, and so it's really important to like meet people where they are. And so one of the things that we put in our new state plan for independent living, that's right, I said those words. So we put it in one of our goals. So we have a goal that Idahoans with disabilities receive the community-based supports they need to live in their community of choice with greater independence. So that's one of our goals, right? Well, and within that goal, we have an objective of the Idaho Silk, the network of centers, and our Commission for the Blind, because they're one of our partners, will expand cultural competence by participating in events, listening and learning about community-specific concerns and issues to and with unserved, and underserved populations. See, I told you I wasn't good with the words. I can write them, but I can't say them. So, you know, and frequently in the disability community, we talk about, we want to reach unserved and underserved populations, right? Our federal grants say target these unserved and underserved populations. And we know somehow what they are depending on where we live, right? So in Idaho, it can be people who live in what we call frontier country, which is very, very rural. They tend to not have broadband. And many still use landlines, right? Because there's no cell phone reception. So that can be an unserved or underserved population. And then we have LGBT community, which is, and I'm kind of going through these about how we tend to focus our energies. So we'll go after the super rural communities, then LBGT, because that's also kind of safe and pretty easy to capture. Generally, everybody's still speaking English. They're reading English to varying levels. I don't have to stretch much as far as bringing in other interpreters. Then we'll branch out to possibly the tribal cultures here. And we have 5 reservations here in Idaho. And we have varying degrees of success there. And then refugee communities. And then Black Americans who were born here. And then Hispanic communities, but that can be a little touchy because they may not speak English. And so that means we have to stretch. We have to come up with the resources to help us with interpreters, or we have to learn another language quickly. For me, that's problematic. I have a language processing difficulty, so I'm doing well to process English. I've tried multiple times to learn other languages, and I'm not successful. And that includes my wife, who only speaks to me in Spanish when she's angry, and I can guess what she's saying. And I won't repeat any of that here. So then on to our purpose for this objective. We cannot hope to build trust and understanding without first increasing our own cultural and linguistic competence. The primary purpose is to listen and learn, not to share information about what an agency or organization has to help people within a given community. Depending on our resources, organizations may provide event sponsorships. However, such sponsorships do not replace actual staff participation in events and should not distract from intentional learning. For example, we can table in an event, but we're not tabling an event that's meant to tell people what our agency can do for people attending the event. We're there to listen and to learn and to pay attention. Active listening and learning mean that I hear what the community needs and wants before I attempt to offer anything. That's easier said than done if you're at a tabling event, right? We all go to our tabling event and we want to share what our center does or what our organization does and how we can help you. No, this tabling event is, here's what we have. Is any of this useful? And mostly not even saying, is any of this useful, but just having conversations with people that come up and getting to know them. And we've had opportunities to do that. The migrant workers host a big thank you harvest event in the fall. And we go out to that event. We're sponsors to help cover expenses to that event. But really, we're just there to demonstrate that we're there. Again, meeting people where they are means we're going to sit down, we're going to shut up, and we're going to listen to what they have to say, what they want, and taking lots and lots of time to build trust. So in the work that I do, right, so we're part of the, we're actually a state agency in Idaho. So we have timelines, right? And then we all have our federal grants that we work on, and we have those timelines, and everything is built around, we have our spill, and we have our objectives, and we have our goals, and we're gonna get it done, and get it done. Well, that doesn't necessarily work when we're going into another culture. We're not gonna just go in and have trust like that because we offered this great service that somebody may or may not want. Building trust it's a long-term proposition. It's a major commitment. It's me taking time participate in the agency and with the organization and with the people and with the community, depending on how much I can do that. And within different cultures, that may or may not be possible for us to do as an organization. The DD Council here in Idaho has really come up with some great ways that they're advancing this. I've learned a lot from the different projects that they do. They actually sponsored us in our whole staff in a cultural competency learning opportunity for the next several months. And so I'm really going to kick it to Christine, because Christine's got this, you know, I'm still kind of philosophical. Christine's got actually done some groundwork on it. So thanks for listening to me.
Thank you, Mel. So I'm going to start by sharing a story about some of the first work that Mel and I did together. And that was, we were searching for leaders around the state that had intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so we were doing a lot of interviews of people. And there was one young lady that I interviewed in Kamiah, Idaho. And she had an amazing presence. And I thought she would be such an excellent candidate to provide training in our state to help people understand what self-determination means, self-advocacy, independent living, all the words that I think both of our programs use a lot when we are doing our work to define our work. And I learned that she had to ask the tribe first before she could participate. She was Nez Perce. And this was the first experience I really had where this happened. And I was faced with a different way of thinking about how individuals participate in leadership development opportunities. The tribe ultimately decided that it wasn't a good use of her time or an appropriate use of her time. And I had to really step back and reflect on what just happened there. And it was a really good education for me to learn that in many cultures, we don't think about individuals, we think about what's good for the community and what's going to be best for the community. And that's not the way I went into this, but it quickly changed the way I think about representing, making sure that we have representation from all kinds of different cultures, and that there are different considerations to be made, much like what Mel reflected on about independent living looks really different to some cultures. It's not an expectation in many cultures that at around 18, our sons and daughters would move out. But yet that's the dominant culture's sort of way of doing things. So it's made us really think about differently about the words that are used both in, in our Federal Developmental Disabilities Act and how we define what our objectives are in our state plans and in our work plans and how we define outcomes for that work. So one of the things that we did is in starting the work of trying to become more culturally competent, we identified the Latino, Latinx, Hispanic community in our state in our last 5-year plan as having the most issues because they're the largest minority in our state. So we completely focused our energies around serving that community. And in doing that, we contracted with what we call a cultural broker. And before I go any further with the explanation of what that relationship looked like, I'd like to have a poll that put up that sort of asks the question about if you understand what a cultural broker is. So how many of you know what a cultural broker is?
Mel and Christine, this is Sidna. Have another question if you'd like to answer it while we're waiting.
Sure.
Do you find common reason for the mistrust in subcultures, and can you give an average length of time as to how long it takes to build that trust?
Hey, Christine, can you actually just give one more second before you give that answer?
Yes.
That way all our screen reader friends can access the poll at the same time. We still have some coming in. You want to go ahead and close it? Seems like they've slowed down.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So you want to answer that question or you want me to answer that question? So we could both answer that
Yeah,
question.
go ahead, Melanie.
So in my experience, it depends on the group. There isn't a pat answer. In my experience in living with and working with the tribal groups that I've worked with, and tribes are different, right? They're different nations, so they're not all the same. Is that it takes a commitment of a substantial amount of time. So when I worked for the State Protection and Advocacy System, I was tasked with building relationship on our 5 reservations and creating a plan to do that. And I knew before I started it that wasn't going to be a uniform plan. And that it probably wasn't going to be anything that we had the resources to do. Because in my experience working with the tribes that I had worked with, it took a commitment of being available to go to a potluck, being available to go once invited to a sweat, being able to go to celebrate different family baptisms, different community events, being available to do all those things. And those things don't happen between the hours of 9 to 5 on Monday through Friday, right? Those things happen in evenings, on weekends, through whole weekends, through the course of a week, depending on what it is. That's not something that an organization could easily put money into. So the goal there would be a better use of that time would be to hire someone with a disability from that community, because they already understand all that and they know how to approach it best within their own community. So again, it is not all cultures and communities are that way, but there definitely has to be a put up or show, a show up and put up mentality, I think, over what's years, not months. And understanding that you're going to make mistakes, and when you make mistakes, that will probably create setbacks, and that you have to continue to show up, which is hard and time consuming. Because at least I've made mistakes. I don't know. Maybe you haven't made mistakes.
I made so many mistakes. So I'll respond similarly in that you don't ever stop gaining the trust of the community. It's a constant commitment. And when we started this work, we had a staff that was dedicated to this, as well as contracting with the cultural broker. And it's about showing up and being present and not necessarily putting your stuff on them, but waiting to hear about what their needs are and then working to meet those needs. So I had, in all of this work, you can imagine that not all staff, not all council members were really 100% behind this. So there is work to be done there. And I've even had staff say to me, aren't we done with this cultural competency stuff? And the work of cultural competency is never done. It's a continued commitment because of the large unserved and underserved populations of people that aren't accessing services for language-related barriers. The service isn't culturally competent. It's just never done. I've had council members walk out, storm out of council meetings because they didn't believe in the work that we were doing in supporting the Latino, Hispanic, Latinx community in our state, which in our state is predominantly Mexican American. So you have to grapple with those growing pains. And to my thinking, I was okay with seeing certain council members leave our council if they couldn't get behind this important work of serving all people in our state and really working with our council members to provide ongoing education and a commitment to continuing to show up. And we did make a ton of mistakes. We make mistakes all the time. And just like Mel said, you just have to show up, acknowledge what you did, and say, you know, I'll work to do better. But just as a person who is white, I'm not going to understand all the cultural nuances that come in serving that specific culture, and I'm going to make mistakes. And so the sooner you can acknowledge that and be okay with knowing I'm going to make mistakes, I'm going to try really hard to not cause intentional harm, but I'm going to, with your help, work through this and learn. And when I know better, I do better. And that's the best we can do. So at this point, I'd really be interested in knowing what the poll results were. All right, 11% said they understand what a cultural broker is, and 89% of you said no, that you don't understand what a cultural broker is. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to explain what a cultural broker is for us. And a cultural broker is an individual who is from the community for which you have chosen to serve. So they're a person who is from that community, who understands that culture because they were born into it, and essentially help us to bridge a trusting relationship much sooner than if I were to work as a person trying to bridge that gap, because I wouldn't be trusted automatically. So we ended up, I'm going to go back to the original question that someone had about how long did it take to build trust. We spent almost a year and a half just meeting with and going to, we were hosting these dinners out in Caldwell, Idaho, which has a high population of Latinos in that community, where we were just meeting people and just spending time with people and sharing the meal, much like the dinners that Mel talked about. And we weren't there to bring our annual report or talk about what service we might be able to help them get or talk about what a developmental disability was. We were just there. We were just there to be present, to build relationship. And along the lines, we met a woman who was working as a service coordinator and is also Mexican American. So we essentially courted her for over a year to try and learn about what her goals were for the community, what were her dreams, and kind of just an exchange of information to build relationship like you would do with a friend. And eventually she shared with us that her dream for the community was to have a conference that was held in Spanish, where the presenters were Spanish speaking, the materials were provided in Spanish, and it would be for Spanish speaking families and individuals. And at that point, we thought this is something we could help with. So we were able to say, we think we can help you make this dream a reality. So she was working with a group of moms called the Senoras, who had children and adults who had intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so we really attended their meetings where they were planning this conference. And when they would come up with something that they couldn't figure out how to do, for example, the first presenter they wanted to bring was from Panama. It was a mom from Panama talking about getting her son's needs met. They couldn't figure out the funding of how to get her here to be the keynote presenter for their conference. So we were able to say, that's something that we could help you with if you would like our help. So they had to discuss it and basically give us permission to help with that need. And I don't know what it's like for you in your states, but we work with a fiscal division that's outside of our agency. We had to go through a lot of hoops for some reason to bring in someone from Panama when we were getting feedback about, well, why don't you just bring somebody from, you know, like Oklahoma or some other state? Why do you have to bring somebody outside of the country? So it's a lot of education to those people who don't understand the work of cultural competency to help them understand, listen, we are listening to what the needs are from this community, and we have committed to try to help them fulfill those needs. So we're not questioning their request. They've made this request, and we're going to do everything we can to meet them where they have said they have a need. Eventually, we were able to figure it out with fiscal, and it all happened. And that was really a key to convincing the cultural broker to come on as a contractor to the council, because we were able to demonstrate we weren't just here to kind of push all of our stuff on the community and say, well, you got to have this, and this is what you need. It was really demonstrating we're just here to listen and fill in where you're going to tell us eventually what your need is, and we're going to do everything we can to meet that need. So we've had 3 of these conferences since that relationship was established, and every year it grows. And the last conference we had was last September, and we paid for a bus that was accessible to go to Eastern Idaho, which is also where we have a large population of Latinos living. And we brought over 100 families and individuals on that bus to join us for a conference that's held at the Hispanic Cultural Center. And it was really the first time these families have had any connection to understanding that there are services available for their children that could help with whatever the need is. But for the most part, they didn't ever have any information or access to services. And this is a slow process of both identifying where the disparities are and them accessing the service, and then trying to connect them to the right agency, with the council being sort of the bridge. They'll come to us and say, we want to be certified family home providers, but it requires a class and it's not offered in Spanish. So then we are the bridge to those leaders in that community to present to the agency that's in charge of that oversight of that program to help provide that education so that we can work towards the steps of breaking down the barriers and essentially holding a class in Spanish so that Spanish-speaking families could also become a certified family home provider. So that's just one example of where the council's role is as a kind of mediator, and then really propping up the leaders in that community to lead that education to the agency that needs to hear where they need to change some things in order that all people access that service. So I hope that gives you a good understanding of what a cultural broker is. And I don't know, Sidna, if there were specific questions about that since I've explained that before I move.
Look, we have a question of, do you have advice on working with council members or CIL workers who do not see the differences and therefore don't want to reach out or actively hinder the process? then there's a question of when you're invited to places, do you go as a SIL or SIL rep or just an individual?
So I'll answer the first question. The first question was advice about working with your SILC or DD council members. And it's just an unwavering commitment to present the facts about where the disparities are, reminding them what is in our federal law. And in our federal law, it's unserved and underserved. And there's also reference to providing linguistic access to services. So we have to do a lot of reminding of that. And then we also have to do a lot of training around this topic. So Mel and I both participated in Georgetown University, had sort of an immersion training that they offered in cultural and linguistic competency. Georgetown University hosts the University Center, and their whole focus is, it's the National Center on Cultural and Linguistic Competence. So we had the ability to, for a week, learn about all of these things that really gave us some great tools to be able to bring back to our councils to help them understand all the people that we were not serving. And that our law dictates that we will serve all people and to work to address disparities. So it's an ongoing work. And I would say that if you have members that have issues with this, even after providing training, to give yourself permission to say that that's okay. We aren't going to win it with all people, and to invest in those people who do believe in the work. And you will find people as you continue to do the work, especially people that represent the community that you're serving, who then want to serve on your council because they see the commitment that you're making to that population, and they want to be part of educating the council as well as investing in that community. And before we started this work, we didn't really have people that looked like the people we were serving. So why would they want to participate in our council? So it's really given us the opportunity to gain a lot of amazing families and individuals on our council who give us a whole different level of education and remind us on a constant basis about how and who we're leaving out, which is always great for a council to hear. So I hope that answers your question.
So yeah, so this is Mel. We've had opportunities. We've done some trainings and participated in some conferences for volunteer organizations active in disaster. And I can speak of and we, as the State Independent Living Council, we sponsored some of our staff and then staff from some of the centers across the state to go to this conference. And a staff person, actually a couple staff people from centers made disparaging comments about the Latinx community that we were serving, because one of the things, so we participated in the different workshops and we also gave workshops. And some of the workshops, it's interesting in emergency prep work that we have done. We were initially asked by our migrant council, who works in educating kids and keeping their education going along with them as they go across Idaho up into Washington and then back down. They keep the kids' school records from kindergarten to high school. It's a super cool program. And then the kids get some scholarship money for college when they go through that whole process. And anyway, we were invited to present to them about emergency prep, but it was in order for a family to be prepared should a family member be picked up by ICE. And that's not something that we had necessarily thought about, that we were doing this emergency prep work for, but that's what we ended up doing it for. So I was, when we were at this volunteer organizations active in disaster, it's also called VOAD, and trying to present how we did this training and help different communities be prepared for whatever is an emergency or disaster, right? There were these very derogatory comments made by a couple of staff people. They weren't my staff people, but they were people that we had paid for. And, you know, that's where with staff, I have to, and they're not my staff, but they are people that I paid for to come. And I'm sitting here at a table of different people having a conversation. It's my responsibility, comfortable or not, to say, you know what, those kind of comments are not appropriate. And I'm not going to take away if that's how you feel, but you need to keep that to yourself here. This isn't the place for that. And if you would like to learn more, I'd be happy to talk to you off book, someplace else, at another time. We're not going to have that conversation now. And then I keep those things in mind. If there's a conversation and it seems productive and the person is open to trying to learn more, then maybe we would sponsor them going to another event. Otherwise, I'm going to keep in my head, you know what, this person isn't going to help build up what needs to be built up. And I'm going to remember that. So that may be harsh, but I won't put up with that. And none of my staff are that way. If they're that way, they're not that way in front of me.
Well, and I think to Mel's point, that we do our work in collaboration with the community that we're serving. So the most important thing, I think, for us is to make that community feel comfortable. And if those comments are being made, that jeopardizes our ability to continue building relationship with that community. So, you know, Mel's suggestions about keeping those folks in mind is all in an attempt to support the community that we're trying to serve, welcome them, and create a safe space. So,
and I just want one other thing on that note, because this was a big screw up that we did that we had to fix pretty quickly. So I don't know how many of you know, but like you'll put in a phone something that says in case of emergency, right? This is who you contact. In case of emergency, you contact, you know, my brother, my sister, my mother, whoever. And you put that in your phone as ICE, because that stands for in case of emergency. So that's also a logo used on a Red Cross when you're doing emergency preparedness work. They put in the red, so there'll be a Red Cross, and then across the middle of it is ICE, in case of emergency, is what that stands for. But that's not all ICE stands for, right? So we had to go through all of our emergency prep documents in English and Spanish and pull ICE out of them all. And we had printed a couple of hundred of them on nice paper and everything. And we had to pitch them all. And I had a staff person say, do we really have to get rid of all these? And I was like, yes, we really have to get rid of all these because just one person can see that and it's an automatic, oh, this isn't good. And we don't need that. And you don't lose anything by just having a simple Red Cross there on the logo. You don't lose anything. So that's just one example of you know, making a mistake and trying to fix it quickly.
but it's also a great example of knowing the culture you're serving and sort of what that culture is up against in current events. So.
Okay, Christine and Mel, we have about 10 minutes left and I have 2 more questions for you.
Go
Okay.
for it.
So the first one, again, when you're invited to go places, are you going as the SILC, a SIL rep, or just an individual to attend that particular event? And then the second question I want to ask is, please describe your backdrop. It's too cool not to share that.
Oh, well, I'll let Mel take a stab at the first question, Sidna, that you asked. and I'll try to answer it.
God, I got so lost in the background, I forgot the first question, Sidna.
Do you go as
question
a silk
is-
representative?
So, generally, if I'm asked, because I go out and I meet a lot of people and I know lots of people, so I'm generally asked in the context of my job. So I guess I go as that, but like, so when we started going to the community dinners, we just went. I didn't bring business cards and all that kind of stuff. We just go. When I go to other events, it's kind of a both thing. I mean, I guess I go as me first, but then I'm also there representing an organization, so that if the people who invited me think I need to connect with someone, or someone should connect with me, then that'll be more on that professional level. And so then I'm representing the Silk. So it's kind of both. But I don't wear my work name tag. I wear the name tag of the whatever the conference is using, or whatever the event's using. And if they don't use name tags, I don't use name tags. It's kind of do what they do. And because sometimes we're invited there personally, and sometimes we're invited there professionally. So I kind of, and when you're the director of something, you don't really take that hat off very often. So it's always kind of back there to pull out.
Yeah, I would just echo Mel's response to that question. And I guess it's a different mindset when you're doing this work. You're never going to be like rah, rah, DD Council, rah, rah, Silk. It's really just to be an observer of that community. And if they ask you, or if they want to connect you to a family or an individual, then that's a different thing, because someone's seeking you out because of the job you have or the agency you represent. But mostly I'm just there to like absorb and build relationships, and I don't spend a lot of time talking about the DD Council. It's really about learning about their needs and what they're, and enjoying whatever it is that is happening, because that teaches me something as well. The banner. So we created this banner because of the, when COVID first started happening, we did a survey, and we did a survey of individuals and families, and individuals and families told us that they're really struggling. Individuals said they were struggling with coping strategies, about isolation, about anxiety that was just through the roof. And families were struggling because they didn't know how to do everything that they were being asked to do, to be teacher, parent, so personal care support provider. So we started doing webinars on some strategies and some tips that would help people, some meditation, and just various things. And so we thought it'd be fun to do this backdrop, because when we do our Zoom webinars, we provided in English, and then we have 2 Spanish interpreters. So we have an English channel and a Spanish channel that we do through Zoom. So the Spanish speaking community that we've developed relationship to can participate, and it's translated in real time. And so we just thought it would be nice to reassure people that we're all in this together, and we're gonna do our best to support the community the best we can. So that's really the story of the band.
And I just have to throw in, so I mentioned earlier that we're participating in this cultural competency opportunity with the DD Council that they shared with us, and that has the separate room for the Spanish interpreters, and that's like a whole nother level of access that I'm really anxious to learn more about. We're used to providing ASL interpreters and the closed captioning, but then to also bring in the Spanish interpreters. We do that at workshops, We do that at our emergency preparedness workshops. And that's one thing, but to do it on a Zoom call, it's pretty impressive.
Well, and
It
if you-
works.
if
They make
you-
all that technology work. It's
Yeah, if
super
you want to
cool.
learn about mistakes, you can hear all about how our trial and error of doing these webinars in English and in Spanish, because it took us probably 3 months to get it right. It just took us a long time to bring everybody on board so they could understand how to get to the right language channel. But now we provide some training, and we do it every time. So, because we always have new people joining us, and it's been one way we've been able to continue providing education and develop leaders during this pandemic, which has presented all kinds of strange barriers. So,
Well, I want to thank both of you. You did a wonderful job, and I want to thank all of our attendees. I was kind of keeping track when I could, and one of the times I looked down, you had 111 people participating. So I think that's pretty awesome. So for everybody who did participate, I want to remind you that we will have an evaluation put up. And if you would please fill it out, not only for this session, but for all of the sessions that you attend, because that information is very valuable to us. I also want to remind you that the recordings are going to be available on the conference website. And if you have any questions, please let us know all throughout the conference. We appreciate everybody's help in this, and we appreciate everybody's participation. Thank you, guys.
thank you,
Thanks.
everybody.
Thanks a bunch.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So good.
Have a great conference.
Thank you. We're into it, I guess. We're doing it.
Very
Thank you.
cool. Thanks.
Take care of yourself.